Welcome to my series of basketball videos where I'll be comparing various NBA greats against each other. I'm doing this because I find that a lot of the basketball videos comparing players on YouTube are too focused on the big names and sometimes compare players from different positions. Lots of people compare Jordan to LeBron and Kobe to Duncan, for example, due to their similar levels of achievements, but since those players play different positions and have different styles of play, it's not an interesting comparison. In this series, I want to do comparisons between not just more well-known players, but players from days past, in the 1960s, 1970s, 1980s, and the ABA as well, that most modern fans probably do not have too much knowledge about. Also, as much as possible, I want to compare players that play similar positions and/or similar play styles. To me, that's a more interesting and fruitful comparison. I'll be using 8 different metrics to judge each player. Scoring. This category will be defined by each player's career points per game, peak points per game, both regular season and playoffs, and number of scoring titles. Rebounding. This category will be defined by each player's career rebounds per game, peak rebounds per game, both regular season and playoffs, and number of rebounding titles. Passing. This category will be defined by each player's career assists per game, peak assists per game, both in regular season and playoffs, and number of assist titles. Efficiency advanced metrics. This category will be defined by each player's career true shooting percentage, PER, and win shares per 48. Reason I use true shooting percentage is because it's more fair to guards. Defense. This category will be defined by each player's all defensive selections, defensive win shares, and defensive player of the year awards. The reason I'm not using blocks, steals, or defensive box plus minus is because I want to compare the achievements of older players that modern fans might not have too much knowledge about, and players in the 1960s and early 1970s do not have these stats tracked. Awards. This category will be defined by all-star appearances, all-NBA selections, MVPs, finals MVPs, and championships as a top 3 player. The reason I have to count championships as a top 3 player on the team is because otherwise you'll get into the situation where, for example, Robert Horry has 7 rings and Karl Malone has 0, and it's not representative of how much better a player is if you weren't a top 3 player on that team contributing to a championship. Also, I'll be including ABA stats and awards and using them equivalent to their respective NBA stats and awards. Also, no All-NBA third team selections are included because All-NBA third teams weren't added until the late 1980s, which is unfair to older players. Playoffs. This category will be defined by how many Eastern Conference Finals or Western Conference Finals and Finals a player has been to, and how many championships they won as a top 3 player on the team. Yes, this is supplementary to the awards category because it also rewards players for making it far in the playoffs, even if they don't necessarily win at all. Totals. This category will be defined by longevity, how many total points, rebounds, assists, and win shares a player has accumulated throughout their career, and rewards a player's durability. After all, a lot of people say the best ability is availability. And of course, this is only going to be my opinion from comparing the available metrics, since I've not watched most of these players live or even been born when some of these players have been playing. And to keep it fair, I'm judging them based on how they did in their own era. There's no comparing what this NBA player played in today's era or the 1960s, none of that. It'll be strictly based on their stats and accomplishments within their own era against that era's competition, which makes the most sense to me. So I hope you guys enjoy this comparison video and hopefully learn something new from it. The 34th episode in the series looks at 2 Hall of Fame combo guards who both played for the Boston Celtics and Phoenix Suns. Both won championships with the Celtics in the 1970s and in fact were traded to those teams for each other. Paul Westphal started his career as part of the 1970s Boston Celtics, which were co-captained by John Havlicek and Dave Cowens, winning a championship with them as a bench player before being traded to the Phoenix Suns, and leading the Suns to the finals the very next year as their best player. The player who he was traded to the Suns for is none other than the other player in this video, Charlie Scott. Scott was a star in the ABA before joining the Phoenix Suns and was their best scorer before being traded to the Celtics for Westphal. He then won a championship with the Celtics as a supporting player. These 2 players' careers are very much entwined, and neither of them are very well known by modern NBA fans, so I decided to do this video comparing them. So who had the greater career? Let's find out. In the scoring category, both players were crafty scorers in their primes. Westphal averaged 15.6 points per game for his career, peaking at 25.2 points per game in 1978, and 12.5 points per game in the playoffs, peaking at 26 points per game in 1978. Scott averaged 20.7 points per game for his career, peaking at 33.4 points per game in 1972, leading the ABA in scoring that year, and 18.3 points per game in the playoffs, peaking at 26.8 points per game in 1971. Both of these players could be counted on as the main scorers for their team, but Scott was more of a volume scorer than Westphal was, and also was a tremendous scorer for the 2 seasons he was in the ABA, so I think the edge will go to him. In the rebounding category, it's not that close, as Westphal averaged only 1.9 rebounds per game for his career, peaking at 3.2 per game in 1976, and 1.4 rebounds per game in the playoffs, peaking at 3 rebounds per game in 1978, while Scott averaged 4 rebounds per game for his career, peaking at 4.2 per game in 1971, and 4.9 rebounds per game in the playoffs, peaking at 6.6 per game in 1971. In this category, it's easy to see that Westphal was a below-average rebounder, and Scott was a very solid rebounder for the guard position, so this category will also go to Scotty. In the passing category, both players played as combo guards, where they could either play as the main playmakers for their team as a point guard or handle more of the scoring duties as a shooting guard. Westphal averaged 4.4 assists per game, peaking at 6.5 dimes per game in 1979, and 3.3 assists per game in the playoffs, peaking at an impressive 9.5 assists per game in 1978. Scott averaged 4.9 assists per game for his career, peaking at 6.1 per game in 1973, and 4.8 assists per game in the playoffs, peaking at 6.8 per game in 1971. For this category, I think it's too close to call, as both players were very good passers that could be relied upon for their playmaking. Westphal had the higher peak, but Scott was slightly more consistent, so this category will be a tie. In the efficiency and advanced metrics category, it's easily in Westy's favor. This might be due to the differences in how they scored. Scott was more of a perimeter jump shooter and got most of his points from the mid-range, whereas Westy would often drive in for an easy layup or a high percentage look, and he took better shots in general, giving him the efficiency advantage, so this one will go to Westphal. In the defense category, I would say it's fairly close, as the defensive weight shares are fairly similar, and although I don't track this, it's noteworthy to mention that their career steals per game and blocks per game are exactly the same. Neither player seems to be much better than the other as a defender, and they just seem to be both okay, so this one will end up being a tie. In the awards category, it's interesting as both were 5-time All-Stars who won a championship on the Celtics as a role player, although Scott was actually a starter and Westy was a bench player for them. So really it comes down to the All-NBA selections. The interesting thing to note is that Westphal kept getting All-NBA first-team selections for a total of 3 first-team selections. Scott only had 1 first-team selection, and it was in the ABA. After Scott moved to the NBA, he actually never got any All-NBA selections, first or second. So I think Westy's advantage in All-NBA selections here will give him the nod. In the playoffs category, it's pretty close as both guys won a ring with the exact same team, the 1970 Celtics, just 2 years apart. In addition, both went to a conference finals as well, Scott with the ABA Virginia Squires and Westphal with the Suns. But what gives Westy the edge here is his extra finals appearance in 1976, where he led the Suns to a remarkable finals appearance where they upset Rick Barry's Warriors in the Western Conference Finals to face off against Charlie Scott's Celtics in the finals, as fate would have it. So that crucial finals run, I think, is what solidified Westy as a Hall of Famer, and it gives him the advantage here. In the longevity category, I would say it's more or less equal, as both players played a similar amount. Westphal played slightly more games, but Scott also averaged more minutes per game. Westphal actually only averaged over 30 minutes per game in 5 seasons of his career. The fact that Westphal has more total weight shares despite averaging quite a few less minutes per game shows how valuable Westy was to his team when he was actually on the court. So yes, for the longevity category, I would actually say this evens out, so this one's also a tie. So when all the categories are summed up, Scott takes the rebounding and scoring categories, while Westphal takes the efficiency, awards, and playoffs categories, with the rest being a tie, giving Westphal the edge. Paul Westphal is perhaps best known today as the former coach of Charles Barkley's Phoenix Suns, where they made a finals run in 1993. However, he was also a very solid Hall of Fame level player as well, particularly with the Suns, where he led the Suns to the finals as one of their top 2 main stars alongside Alvin Adams, who is a very underrated Suns center who I might cover in another video sometime. Westphal's finals run resulted in one of the most memorable final series of all time, the 1976 finals, which came down to 7 games, in the infamous Game 5, which went to triple overtime, with Westphal making several key plays in that game. Charlie Scott's career started with the ABA Virginia Squires, but he made his way to the NBA as the Phoenix Suns' main scorer, supplementing a declining Connie Hawkins. His career is very tied to Westphal's in that he was traded to the Celtics in exchange for Westphal, and then proceeded to win a championship with the Celtics alongside John Havlicek, Dave Cowens, and JoJo White against Westphal's Suns in the finals. An interesting twist of fate indeed. I hope you guys enjoyed this comparison. Thanks for watching. Hope you guys learned something new. Be sure to like and subscribe, and stay tuned for the next comparison video.